We have the opportunity to introduce our guest speaker today. Eric Robbins is the newly elected Pima County Democratic Party chair. He has a wonderful background as a precinct committee person, a school teacher. He's the former second vice chair of Legislative District 21, where he worked with Chair Jackie Bauer on the 10,000 Voters Project. He's a resident of Ward 5, teaches math and science at Paulo Freire Freedom School on University Boulevard. He has an MBA that he earned at the Eller College of Management at the University of Arizona. He has a strong background in team building, process design, and improvement, as well as teaching and training. Strategic planning is one of his focus for Beyond 2024 for the Pima County Democratic Committee. Prioritizing fundraising goals and outcomes, reinvigorating robust training programs for volunteers, PCs, legislative district leadership, supporters, and candidates. He'll be supporting our legislative districts with organization, recruiting, training, fundraising, and program execution, working together to achieve successes. So let's give a silent but enthusiastic round of applause for Eric Robbins.
I appreciate that. Thank you for the lead in, Joe. So it's lovely to be here. Thank you so much. But I think as much as anything, it's important for me at this point to be an ear and to listen and to take as much, guidance and advice from people who have been working in the field, so to speak. So I'd really, if it's okay with my hosts, I would be happy to turn this back into an open forum and let people sort of open it up with questions, anything they'd like to address, and we can speak to it. Is that okay?
Michael, you have a question. You're first in the queue.
Well, my first question for Eric and his team is, how are you going to reach out to the team that was running against you and incorporate their ideas and their energy into your administration?
Yeah, great question. And happy to speak to that generally. We're going to have to leave some of the particulars up to how people respond individually, of course. I've actually already put some phone calls out. I wanted to personally actually give it about 24 to 48 hours in a couple of cases for obvious reasons. But I personally reached out to several people who were either supporting that team or who were running on that team. And that door is going to be open, that my hand is going to be open. My phone number is available. I'm not turning away any phone calls. So I certainly want to talk to Kim about some of the fundraising things that she had proposed. I agree that she's got a lot of strength and connections in that area. It would be a shame for the PCDP to lose that. I think she's going to support candidates no matter what, but I would certainly love to speak to her and anybody else on that team who wants to continue the conversation.
Steve Linder.
I have a couple of questions about what you do personally as far as your job. I was a teacher for 37 years. How are you going to be able to do this job with a full-time job? And teaching is a full-time job plus. Why did you go to teaching in a charter school instead of the traditional public school system?
Yeah, sure. Happy to address that. So very broadly, Steve, my understanding and looking at the history of it, most chairs for PCDP have been full-time employed on the side. There are a number recently who either been retired or didn't have to work for one reason or another, but it is probably more the norm that they do. So the job is really designed to be handled or managed by a working person, at least who's mindful and certainly can be flexible. To your point, and I certainly don't want to indicate that I intend to give my teaching role any short shift. But I have made it clear that the remainder of this year that my duties, they are contractually ending at a certain time. I do have parent-teacher conferences, as you know, but I schedule those at my convenience. And although I continue to do those, I get to make them work around my schedule. So the short answer is I fully intend to do both. I fully am confident that I can do both. I've taken accommodations in the role to make sure that I can accommodate the needs of the chair. I am no less dedicated to my students. Let me answer your second question next. So I'm actually a late career switched education. I'm actually in the certification program now. So though I hold multiple degrees, as you probably know, the path to full-time certification requires that I stay employed full-time as a teacher. And so last year I actually was at TUSD. I served as a science teacher over at Miles Elementary on Broadway for the year. But that was, I was told at the time, it was a one-year position. They had a regular employee in TUSD who'd been there for 20 odd years, was a PhD who wanted that role. And so I was told at the end of the year, like, you're on the win. You have to go find yourself another place to be employed next year to continue the certification process. At that point, my resume was on the street. Yes, I got picked up by a charter school, but just to speak particularly, I agree with you on the main about charter schools. I'm also not generally a fan. I think what Arizona does is borderline criminal with how they've defunded and legitimized, public education. I'm a strong advocate for that, just for the record. The charter school I'm at is Paulo Freire Freedom School. It does happen to be a very progressive school. We are probably one of the most progressive schools in Southern Arizona in terms of our student body, how we recognize student identity. And so although we are in that charter space with all the problems attendant to it, I'm not going to make any bones about that. I took it to continue the certification process, which I finish at the end of this year. And then my options are open to me again. My intention, if I stay in this space, would be probably to move back into public education. I agree. I'm not a big fan of the charter schools, but I don't want to speak poorly of my school because I do love it. And the kids there are amazing and I love them. So I'll leave it at that. You get the point. Okay. If that's okay.
I had
That was
a
a good-
question of my own, if I might ask.
Sure.
And that is, Eric, tell me a little bit about the Udall dinner. The one that was held back in September was just a fantastic success. I got a chance to be part of it.
Mhm.
And I understand that there is not a Udall dinner scheduled for next year. Tell me what your planning is.
Yeah, clearly this all came together under the prior leadership, but here's what I know. I was adjacent to much of it. And as most of you know who were there, I was actually working the table for for people who were showing up. So that dinner was the first one they'd done in a while because of COVID. Carol can speak to this in more detail, but the Udall dinner clearly takes a lot of work and a lot of preparation to pull off. James, who I believe was your guest just a couple of weeks ago with the Young Dems, was instrumental in that too. He pulled, a lot of weight and put a lot of work into that. And so part of the reason that was a success, to your point, Larry, is a lot of people pulled from a lot of different directions to make that a good event. And I agree. I think the vibe was really, really good. Adrian Fontes was a phenomenal speaker that night. I think he was timely. He's a powerful speaker. So, and people were just grateful to get out and have a nice time, which I think people did. I believe, my understanding is, the reason that the decision was made to not have Udall dinner in 2023 was to get it back on the same cycle. It was primarily a spring event. It's problematic when it occurs in the fall, especially when it's conflicting with elections. So they want to take it off that cycle again. And so the option was either to try to have it again in 6 months, which seemed far too rushed for the people who planned it. Plus, it is a financial drawdown for people who attend it. And so the decision was made to push it out a full year and change to get it back into the spring cycle next year. In the meantime, however, we intend to fill the space in 2023 with a different series of events. We are still working with different groups to try to come up with the best types of events. So again, open offer to this group. You're welcome to reach out to Carol Schloff or anybody here on the team and give us your ideas. But one of the ones that's coming together most quickly is to model the Maricopa brunches, which they have, I believe, at least quarterly. And they have proven to be a good fundraiser. They're a little easier to put together. They can have them more frequently. They don't need as large a venue. And it's just kind of a different feel and a different type of event. And then once we get the Udall dinner back on schedule, we'll continue with both going forward because we may be serving different audiences then. We'll have to see what the data shows at that point. Hope that answers the question.
Thank you.
Okay, George Beverly, unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hello, Mr. Eric. In your position right now, what are you going to do for underserved communities and minority candidates that are running for office? Because what I saw in this last election was candidates did not get heavy push, nor did they get an elevated look to the people in their communities, especially when they canvass or they did debates. One person that jumps out at me is Dana Almond. She canvassed every day, pushing, and her region was the Catalina area over in Mount Lemmon. And, that was heavily Republican, red districts, and it was an uphill battle. But I didn't see any type of support from the Democrat position to help her come over the top. what can we do to bring other communities like the Filipino community, the Asian Pacific Islander community? What can we do to get the Chinese or Japanese community? Those are diamonds. They're just sitting there that we don't naturally address. That's just my question. So thank you. I appreciate it.
No, great questions. I appreciate that, George. Nice. And thanks. It's nice to meet you too. Appreciate you. I can't speak to the particulars of Dana's campaign. I didn't have anything to do with that. I'm down the South Side and I was working on different stuff in LD21. But to your broader point, I'm going to flip a little bit of this back in a second because I want to hear your thoughts on this as well. But to the broader point, I've heard this multiple times. Like, this is not we're not inventing this, we're not discovering this problem in this meeting, right? Like, people are saying this. How do I say this? From a leadership position, I want to approach it like this. When I'm hearing the same kind of complaint come up like that, clearly we're not doing the right things. Like, it's that whole bit about if you try to do the same thing, expecting a different result, definition of insanity. That's a bit of what I feel like is going on here. Philosophically, generally, and at the risk of sounding like this is a soundbite answer, Dems have certain values. Those values align with these communities. They align with communities you mentioned. Clearly they align in identity in some ways, but multiple people told me they didn't feel comfortable coming to PCD headquarters. They told me they'd never been to PCD headquarters, that they didn't feel like it was their place. Like that pains me in my heart, right? Like, I hate that. I think that it's going to be, in some respects, a gradual solution, but one that requires a lot of commitment. And so here's the phrase I'm trying to coin for what this is worth. Dems have values. These communities have values that align with Democrats. We need to have values in those communities. We need to be Democrats exhibiting those values in those communities, not once, not during election cycles, forever. Like, that's it. If we're going to be joined in that community, we make that kind of commitment. I'm not saying that people haven't had it. I'm trying to cast aspersions on people's efforts. I know that people have made legitimate efforts in the past, but clearly the gaps are still painfully wide. There's a term that we use at PFFS at my school where we talk about, inclusion of communities and making spaces where people are feeling welcome and safe and checking, your inherent bias and your racial bias. But a phrase that we have internalized, that I've, tried to internalize, is to use discomfort as a guide in these situations and lean into that conversation. That is far easier said than done. And having done that a few times and for a few years and being highly committed to it, still easier said than done, right? But I think that's the path. Also, the EC committee, which has existed in the past and may have had its problems or its challenges, that is continuing. We've got people on that board. I've already spoken to everybody on that board. I want those people to tell me what their community needs from PCDP. If PCDP is a machine that is designed to serve communities in the political arena, it has to have intersection in meaningful ways. Again, back to values and community. We have to find what that means in that community. And to the point that you made about not leaving any community untouched, I think that's an excellent point. I was hearing that Raphael Warnock was running ads in Korean in the last re-election. Like, he was going after every sub-community they could find, and they were making financial commitments and messaging commitments to do it. So again, it's got to make the bridge from sounds good, are you going to do it? And of course, all that requires money, all that requires the fundraising that we're talking about to catch fire for us to increase the base. But there's a long-winded answer, but I hope you know that I'm behind you in that. I think it's a deeply important thing for us to do, to commit to, and to commit to the hard work that it's going to take. It's not a tomorrow solution, but I'm in it if you are, and I appreciate your help on it. Keep me posted. Stay in touch with it. Here's the question I promised I wanted to ask to you. You mentioned several communities. Do you have any short, just top of the mind ideas to say, why doesn't PCPD do this? Like, anything top of mind for you? Can I ask that?
So Tucson hired a equal opportunity chief. Her name is Lauren Walker.
Mm-hmm.
I would suggest to link up with her in her office because she's working in all of those communities and she has more access to those communities than I would ever have. So I think as far as reaching out to diverse communities, I believe, this is my only assessment, is this is the problem with the Democratic Party, and this is why other minorities are leaving the Democratic Party, because they feel like they're not being heard. So why stay in a party that align with our values, but are not doing anything to support us after all this time. So
I mean, as brutal as it sounds, I agree. In the end, politics is a zero-sum game. It is a whiffum situation. What is in it for me? Why do I belong to this party? What does it matter to me and my family if we don't have? I say this in class for you fellow teachers in the room. I say to my kids, if I can't answer the who cares question, I'm not doing my job as a teacher. I feel like that's also true for us. If we can't answer as Democrats, why should I care? That should be tip of tongue, top of mind. Okay, I'm beating a dead horse. You get it. Thanks, George. We'll talk about this. I wrote Lauren's name down. Thank you.
Yeah, great interaction. Andrea Kennedy, unmute yourself and ask your question.
My question to you is, I look at who supported you and who you like, and who you relate to, you hang out with, to be colloquial. Why should I feel welcome at the Pima County Democratic Party? Because I do not. And it makes me sad because I spent a good part of my life there.
I appreciate the candor, Andrea. So let me go ahead and back up just a little bit. I spoke with Kim a couple of times. We communicated before the election. I have not yet spoken with her after. I intend to reach out to her. She was very gracious about reaching out to me before. I reached out to her as well, wished her good luck. I'm hoping that we'll continue that. But just to make clear, I didn't want anybody to think I'd spoken with her since Saturday. I have not yet. My intention is to do so. Let me go back to the point about, or the language, if you will, about who I hang out with. Political parties are what they are. I'm working on building my network. I do not intend to carry the baggage forward from past events. I understand that people have had very bad experiences. I have heard that there were things done by people that I would categorize as very poor behavior and things that I probably wouldn't do. But as a crucial rule of my behavior, if I wasn't there and I didn't see it and I wasn't involved, it is hearsay to me. Whether it's true or not, I have to take it from where I enter the picture. To your point, I want you to know you are absolutely welcome at headquarters. I will meet you at your house or for coffee or anywhere you want to engage you at whatever degree you feel comfortable with. If you have been instrumental in what Pima County Party has done, I want to help take advantage of that. I want to honor that work. I appreciate you. Thank you for that. I'm sorry that there's been bad experience in the past. My effort would be to try to make it so that it's positive going forward in the interest of the party as a whole.
Michael Bryan, you have a question.
Yeah, I noticed that you brought Shelley Burgoyne with you, and everybody here who knows what's going on really appreciates her work over the past year or so with the communications team. I just wanted to know, what kind of official role she's going to be playing in your administration in the county, and maybe if she wants to say a few words about what she's up to.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. But first, I'm going to jump in and just give her high praise because A, you're sick, and are you at work? You're supposed to be home. Shelley's been working even though she's sick. So Shelley, and I'll let her speak to this, but she's the executive director now, which is the full-time office person who runs the facility. Basically, she's got her hands in pretty much everything that's going on. She has a phenomenal background for this, and my meetings with Shelley have been positive and focused, and I am thrilled to be working with her. There's a point that I made before the election, and I'll make it here too. Although the chair, selects and with the approval of the board, hires the executive director, I think it's very important for the executive director position to have continuity across leadership groups, across administration. In many ways, that role is the connective tissue. And for that to change every time a chair comes in, I think is wildly disruptive. So I'm thrilled that Shelley's staying on board. I hope that she intends to stay for 2+ years. I hope when I leave, whoever my successor is finds her as valuable as I do. She's worth her weight in gold. I'll leave it at that. Shelley, all yours.
Oh, thanks, Eric. It's really too kind. Thank you. So yeah, I'm Shelley Burgoyne. I've been here. For those of you who don't know me, I started here as a volunteer when my husband deployed to Kabul. I began here. I met Kat Ripley, who was the director. I have a master's degree in digital politics from George Washington University. So I started to help her with social media, and it just sort of evolved from there. And I then went into the communications director role for a bit of time, and sort of here I am right now. I'm a former Army officer and a combat veteran. So I have a lot of experience in logistics and sort of long-term planning out large projects, events, and sort of executing those and making them happen. How I see my role here is to provide the daily support so that I can move the chair's vision forward for the party. I'm here at headquarters today. This is our building, for better or for worse. It may not in the future be, but for right now it is. I want anybody on this call and all people to know that they are welcome here at any time. My door is always literally open. My cell phone number is in the chat. I am responsible for the building and running the daily operations of the building, being a good steward of the security of the building, the condition of the building, as well as our digital files we keep here at the office, that financial files, our entire Google Drive. I run a core of volunteers here that are moving from sort of answering phones to project-based volunteerism, both and also answering the phones. But they all have some great projects they're working on. We currently have 2 interns that we're probably going to hire in the next coming weeks. They're highly qualified, so I can't wait to bring them on. I have 2 kids who are in school, one in junior high, one in high school. My husband just retired from the Army, 23 years. I'm the first person in my family to have a degree or to go to college. From Tucson, I grew up in Tucson. I have my undergraduate degree from the U of A. I went to Blendman Elementary School. And that's sort of me and how I see my role here. I'm available anytime. A little flaw that I have, I guess, would be I tend to move really quickly. That's like left over for me in the Army. I like to execute stuff. I'm a little aggressive when it comes to just kind of moving stuff forward. I kind of believe in inertia. And when you just start to do stuff, things happen. So I'm highly interested in speaking with you, George. I think that anything we can do in this realm that you are talking about, diversity and kind of trying to push our party into something that better represents who we really are. I'm very interested in that. I'm very interested in anything I can do to help with that. And that's all. Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here today. Any questions?
Great. Well, thank you, Shelley. Really appreciate it. We have a question from Jim Hannon.
Congratulations, Eric, on your election. Eric, I think we Democrats are coming to the realization that basically we suck at messaging. This is a national problem. And if you're a Republican, for example, you can turn on your radio and get Republican talking points literally 10 to 12 to 15 hours a day on talk radio. So I guess my overarching question to you, Eric, is what do you plan to do to get the Democrats' core message out to the 1 million people that live in Pima County? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question, Jim. I appreciate that. So there's kind of 2 levels about this. I want to address your first point, and that is that I think the GOP and their allies do kick our butt at messaging. I think they have an advantage that they're shooting for what in marketing we used to call the bottom of the pyramid, which is to say they get to be a little bit less nuanced and still sort of carry their message, because their message is more about beating the drum and lighting fires than it is about making an actual point that bears up under scrutiny. Dems oftentimes, I think, are the victim of their own navel gazing, if you will. I think it turns our messaging into diatribes sometimes and exposition when it needs to be a soundbite. Is that a fair point? Would you agree with that? Yeah. So sort of that point, I think we can do better on that. So the way to do that is to recruit people who understand that in our messaging endeavors. We've talked about that. Some of the people on this leadership team, Shelley and I have talked about that. Jen working on the website and taking on a social media stance that is a little bit more systematic, if I can put it that way. I know that we do social media, but we need to live in that space considerably more, not periodically posting. To your point, if you're a GOP person, if you're a MAGA person, you run into their media messaging constantly. We have limited resources at the county, but I think we need to be programmatic in how we do that so that we can maximize that. I've worked in companies that did very smart and nuanced social media aggressing of their messaging, and I've seen that really, really pay off if you're good at it and you're systematic at it. You don't even have to be so some of the strategies you see out there are very unsophisticated. There's lots of better ways to do that. So enough said, I'm kind of getting in the weeds there. Something else that you mentioned, I think deserves to be touched on too. And this has to do with our presence in the communities. And I want to go back to that value in community thing that I was stressing before. Some of our presence and our vision, our visibility in the community needs to be related to us living the vision as opposed to merely being, a sign or something on the radio. We need to be there as well. That's important. People mentioned during our Zoom meetings that you go to all these events and farmers markets and this and that, and there's oftentimes some kind of GOP presence set up there. Like, we need to just be better at doing that. Again, back to the earlier point, it's a lot easier to say than do that, but recognizing that that's a priority. Sort of to Shelley's point, if I can build on that a little bit, that gets executed because we put that on a schedule and we start recruiting volunteers to do that specific thing and get people out in the community and see what that feels like and looks like and has the results for, and do more of it and talk about it a little bit less, if I can put it that way. So again, I'm kind of going around the horn on this, but I agree with you. We can message better. We need to be more committed and more systematic, and we need to have more presence in the communities.
Okay, Larry Bodine.
Gail Camaras has a question, and she wonders if it would help diversify the Pima County Democratic Party if we were to engage volunteers to be a part of the staff and, the volunteers at the headquarters building.
It's not like people of color or minority groups are not, being recruited. They're not welcome. So it's not exactly like it's a Boolean question, something we're not trying to do now, but to a point that's been made multiple times. And I mentioned it, when people of color tell me they don't feel comfortable there, it's awfully hard to recruit them. So we need to solve that, as well. Like, those are bundled, nested problems. Clearly, nobody's going to volunteer a place they've never been to, for sure. So we need to have open houses. We need to have things going on at headquarters that engage people in a low stakes way, so they can come down there and see the place and find it and meet some people and have a face to a name and a name and a face to a voice. And then the volunteerism, I believe, flows naturally. Again, we plan it out and execute it, but that's where we got to start. It is my intention to work with Shelley so that I can be available on Saturdays and Sundays for a few hours consistently, so people know when somebody will be there on the weekends that they can come down. If they can't get there during the week, which I think is a problem for many people, I'm hoping that will also open it up to people of different schedules and different lifestyles as well.
Great. Michael, you have a question.
So you noted that the down ballot races are really one of the areas where the county party can have a big impact. We came up short in a couple of key races, especially here in Pima County. Like in CD6, we lost a congressional seat by just over 5,000 votes. We lost the House and Senate, or at least the possibility of a tie in the House and Senate here in LD 23 and LD 17. By just a few thousand votes. Dana came within 1,800 votes of tying the House up. So my question for you is, given that we are so close and that, these margins matter here, and especially in 24, we're going to be very central to keeping the state on track. Where do we invest our money as Pima County Dems in order to get us over that hill?
If we look at the voter turnouts and responses from the different LDs, we are going to see that several LDs had dramatically better impact. And I think that translated into votes, disparity pockets that cost us local spot elections like you're referring to. Go ahead, Shelley.
I think that the down ballot races here in Pima County were devastating, those losses. There's a few legislative districts that really know how to find data and use it. And I'm a firm believer in radical inclusion and sharing of assets. So one of my goals is to not only say that we're going to radically include everyone and radically share these talents that some of the legislative districts have and resources they have in terms of compiling data and using it, but maybe try to create systems here at headquarters where that just has to take place. Like, it's not even really, an option. I would love to see, I'll call it data boot camp, but we can come up with a different name. Just sort of educating all legislative districts on how to acquire data, how to use it, and to find out where the pockets are in their legislative districts that need help or that we're just not looking at. And the down ballot races are super important. I would like to create systems that make it a requirement that we do certain things to help each other win these races.
Stephen Meisel, do you have a question?
I'm focused on one thing. What is the message going to be? Because I have a sense that for a lot of people, we know that the Republicans are very disciplined. And if they're going to talk about things that they think are important to the average person, how they're going to put food on the table, is it safe, what's going on in terms of crime, very simple issues. And there's a perception Democrats are interested in pronouns, but there has to be a priority list of what the Democrats are going to get behind as a party and be known for. And I think that there's a big problem in that regard. So I'm curious to know what the thinking is on that and how the message is going to really talk about impacting the majority of people's lives in their everyday life.
I mean, I don't want to pretend that I'm going to be like the master of all messaging. That's not really my role, and I might have some thoughts on it. I know what works for me, Steve, and I think to your point, I alluded to this earlier. My sense is that much of dem messaging gets kind of wrapped around the axle, if I can use that expression. We're a wordy bunch. The danger of us being so literate and smart, we just have to show everybody, right? And nobody wants to read that. That doesn't work. To your point, the bread and butter issues, if we get to use that term, I do think that the GOP has an advantage in that they just are shamelessly willing to lie about things on certain issues, ginning up fear and then pretending to be a solution for something that doesn't exist is a little bit easier in some ways. Like, you really just start and end with the messaging. You don't have to worry about the substance or whether it fits. I think we do less of that. I'd like to think we do less of that, which is a bit of a handicap, if you will, the weight of the truth, so to speak. But we certainly need to be listening to the people in our greater community who are better at this. And I think, maybe to a point made earlier, some of our messaging is a bit, it's tired. It's been around in the political wind for a long, long time. And what's playing, in 2022 might not be what was playing in 1975 when some people who were in party leadership kind of were cutting their teeth, right? So, like I was joking with somebody the other day, I said, I'm proudly, part of the party that's neither Nazi nor werewolf, and they started laughing. I'm pretty sure they're going to remember that. Like I want, and I believe that speaks to our values, right? But we got to find lots of different ways to say it. Shelley mentioned this too, when she was talking about different media, paper and in person and digitally. From a marketing perspective, and we proved this in the 10,000 Voters Project, it is very important to not only find that message, but to deliver it in a multitude of ways and repeatedly. If you don't commit to both of those things, it's very, very difficult to change anybody's mind on anything. So again, I'm a bit in the weeds on this. Maggie's got her hand up, and I bet she wants to speak to it. Can I call on Maggie?
Hi, everybody. I'm the new second vice chair for PCDP. I want to reiterate what Shelley was saying about reaching out to the LDs. We not only can we help them, they can help us. A lot of them have really good systems already in place. And so I think it's a give and take. We just have to engage more as an umbrella organization. I'm so excited to work with Shelley because her concepts are so aligned with mine. I think what we really have to understand as a party and as a group like this is that the boots on the ground are at the LD level. That's where our concepts, our efforts, everything ultimately has to go to the LD level so that the boots on the ground can take advantage of whatever it is we come up with and help them with.
Mary Jensen, you have a question.
With regard to coordination, if we have mission working and LDs working, stuff gets a little confusing. Because I wanted to canvass for Kirsten Engel, and they were part of mission. I was working through mission. I canvassed in LD 18 sometimes, LD 19 one time, and LD 17. But mission was really focused on more to the top of the ticket. One time I was at Mission and I wanted to get literature for Martin Quezada. One of the volunteers at Mission told me, we don't work with, he's not one of ours. I was sort of going, excuse me, he's running for state's treasurer. Like, who are you? I had to really push Mission to make sure that I got literature for the LDs that I was walking in, because I also wanted to talk about the people who were LD candidates for the state legislature, and I also wanted to bring literature about ballot propositions, and a lot of that wasn't available through Mission.
So very broadly, I've used this term a couple of times about becoming programmatic. Again, one of the challenges I think at the county level, and I'm speaking to the past for things I wasn't here for, is that there's a bit of a brain drain every time there's a leadership transition. There's a bit of a change in how things are done. And so groups like Mission who come in, it's a bit of a wild card as to what they're going to be dealing with. And so they create their own systems because they at least know they can depend on their own systems. And then it's incumbent upon us to integrate with that on some respects, right? But if I'm hearing the problem that you're describing properly, it sounds as though headquarters needs to become more of a logistics hub. It needs to become more of a processing place for questions about these kinds of things. You echo something that was my experience too. 2016, when I was still sort of wildcatting it and just joining up with any group I could in my neighborhood, it took me a while to get integrated with PCDP, like multiple phone calls and chasing people down. It was a little harder at the time than I thought it should have been. And again, that was a while back and there were tough times going on. So I get it, but we can certainly work to smooth that. I don't want to pretend it's super duper easy, but I take your point. It can be a jumbled mess sometimes. It's beautiful when it works, but if you get lost in the weeds, it's really tough. Shelley, do you want to add to that at all?
She's right. We need to have literature consolidation and organization here at Pima County Democratic Headquarters. And there needs to be down ballot literature that people can pick up and people can coordinate canvassing for down ballot candidates. And it sort of needs to happen physically here, maybe at this office.
Kitty Kennedy will have our last word.
I'm also part of the team that was elected with Eric on Saturday. I'm the new recording secretary. I live in LD 16. Redistricting put the west side Tucson Mountains community of interest into Pinal County. We organized the Pima County part. We flipped a red seat blue. We have a member in the House legislature from LD 16 that is representing people that most of them, the last time they were represented by a Democrat was in 2003, and the other half of them have never been represented by a Democrat. We already have a post-mortem set up to go back and analyze what we did right, what we did. I'm throwing out the challenge to everybody on this Zoom today. Go back to your LD and ask for a post-mortem on the election and what your LD did or didn't do and how it can reflect in how could we work better with PCDP. But keep in mind, most of anything that happens in this state has to be recognized at the Arizona Democratic Party level. This is my opinion. They were a terrible failure in not recruiting and supporting candidates. Look at how many LDs we didn't even run a Democrat. And so start with your LD, ask for a postmortem on the last election and identify what was weak, what was strong, what worked, what didn't, because that's the key to where we're going next time.
So thank you very much, Kitty. Well, wow, what great conversations today. What great questions, what great answers. Thanks so much for being with us today. Great program, Mike. Really appreciated it. We're going to be having a board meeting right after this, so board members, please stay on. Really appreciate everybody's hard work and commitment and efforts on behalf of Democrats. Take care.
Thanks,
Happy
everybody.
holidays.